Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Next Generation Data Center Design, Building the Internal Cloud. My name is Brett LaCourse and I'm a Market Development Manager with Terakai Corporation. Today I'm pleased to introduce Michael Costigian, a 30-year practitioner in the IT marketplace with background in IT management, including application development and business continuity operations. Today Michael will be speaking about next generation data center design and provide insight into the importance of building out your data center to support business applications and ultimately your business as a whole. So without further delay, welcome Michael.
Thank you, Brett, and thank you to the attendees on the line today. I'm going to go through a couple of sets of material about how to think about next generation data center design. And in starting it off, we've looked and done surveys across the IT industry, and we took it from a couple of different perspectives. We took it from the slant of a CIO. We took it from the slant of a director of IT operations, and we took it from the slant of those people who are actually in the trenches doing the work inside the data centers. And what came back to us was that every IT center is being asked for a faster response time, and the users want to mine more and more value out of the information that's under their management. When you look at it from the perspective of the IT teams themselves, everybody's being asked to do more with less, which has been said so often. I don't think it kind of rings. It doesn't get the notice for us all in IT that it should, right? Because we've been doing it for so long, they're getting used to us being able to do it. What is happening is that as the information grows and as the interactions between applications become more and more complex, that you need to help work with each other to figure out ways that we can get the roles and responsibilities inside the data center to the place we need them to be to help the users, not to be running around and chasing the complexity or the growth. Where this came to my notice first was in the area of security in virtual environments. And while we're not going to talk about that today specifically, a lot of what am going to talk about came from thinking about that particular issue that we're confronted with in data centers. Where IT is inefficient, it's not so much because people aren't trying hard, and it's not because IT doesn't get it, because your partners don't get it, or the vendors don't get it. It's because the activities that we're called on to do today are more of an integrated nature across the IT stack than they had been in the past. We used to be able to get to deploy basically an application silo. Business unit said, I want this app, I want this kind of uptime, it runs on this kind of server, tell me what it's going to cost to deploy it. You figure out how to do all the other stuff. I don't want to know. This is what I want. Today, with virtualization cutting across most of the layers of the IT stack, whether it's servers, interconnect through cabling, whether it's storage, even whether it's backup and recovery operations, everything's moving towards being virtual. And that means that what historically we had as areas of competence and where we built all of our metrics, namely in the stacks, the storage stack, the server stack, the applications, in the application area, we had these great metrics around all these things. Now they're being blended together, and our metrics need to catch up with how the data centers are operating today as opposed to how they operated in the past. So one of the things that we do is we speak, and it's something that Terakai is working on and has worked on for a while, are these things called service catalogs. Here in the upper left-hand quadrant is a graphical display of a service catalog. It basically ties the functional areas on the left-hand side, from performance and availability and security, to uptime requirements, here cited as service levels, and those availability levels across the number and types of services they need to provide are becoming the key differentiator for what makes a next-generation data center different from data centers that I had known in the past. When you start to look at what some of these metrics are, they're talking about under 15-minute restoration times for any failure inside the IT stack. Well, that means you have to be able to identify, if something should go wrong, you have to be able to identify rapidly where that issue is, and then B, have in place your ability to address that through your change management system. The items across the bottom, whether it's request management coming in from a new an application for business unit, release management and change management are the things that historically we spent a lot of time working on. Again, the metrics that we would use typically would be, in release management, would be make sure that you have enough storage on hand, make sure you have enough servers on hand. Now it's, we believe we have the servers from a physical perspective. We have servers, and we're going to release maybe a virtual machine on top of that server, and we've got storage, but we're not really sure when we go to do that what's going to happen to the performance of the other apps involved in that. So many of the supply partners to Terakai have worked on reference architectures that speak to, if I have to think about all these things in the service area, how do I provide a capacity on demand model that cuts across what we would have viewed as silos of infrastructure before and allows us to more rapidly address the business issues and adjusting to and adapting the infrastructure to business requirements. And in terms of the background for all of this, what we're seeing is, in addition to plan, build, and run, which everybody on this phone does all the time, right? We're thinking about how we're going to deploy the next application, right? And how would we plan to put it in the infrastructure, and then how would we build it out, and then how would we run it? More and more over the last 18 months, IT management is saying, okay, great, I love what we're doing, I love what my people are doing. What I need is a way to get a dashboard for what's going on around me, and I want to be able to slice that dashboard by what's important to me today. That is, I want to be able to look at how much my virtual machines are consuming in terms of resources. I want to look at how much of my storage is being used to produce replicas. I want to be able to deploy my business like it's an infrastructure as a service. That's the IIS note here on the left-hand side. And, you know, when I talk to people, you know, they want to look at SaaS and they want to look at platform as a service. And then I said, well, why don't we just take it from the point of view that anything you touch has to be treated as a service, right? And we need to figure out collectively how to manage that environment and how to do release management and change management into that environment without going backwards in terms of what we're already providing. We talked a little bit before about what's old. That is, we know resources are tight and they're not getting bigger. The 24 by 7 storefront is my catchphrase for your Web 2.0 or Web 3.0 development. That is, your information is being pulled forward into the world on greater numbers of time zones, right? So that your uptime requirements get impacted by that, right? Because there's no time to do things like whether it's backup or patching, and you need new ways to address those things. And the other thing that's been true for a bit now is that users, when they go home at night, they have access to everything on their internet, right? Because of what's available at houses today. So they just kind of presume that because the internet's always on at home, that their information is always going to be available to them. We kind of take this to the point where we said, okay, the goal of a next generation data center is to be able to produce any application to any endpoint at any time, right? And as we start thinking about data center design going forward, we need to keep in mind that not only are things getting more complex in our world in the data center, they're also getting more complex at the endpoint. Over the last 5 years, there have been multiple new additions to endpoints. I mean, it's not just a smartphone anymore. It could be all kinds of new devices that are portable and transportable and are capable of supporting interaction with the application suites inside data centers. So if you couple kind of the newness of the technologies at the endpoint with some of the newness of the technologies in the data centers that we're trying to work with, I think the merging of those two threads, I think, will be the key to whether or not your data centers can support next generation information processing or not. To that point, if you look at budgets inside data centers, roughly a third of the budgets are affiliated with operations management. This is managing service levels at the information level, for the information suites that you have under management. And it's from this point outward that sometimes you can get a handle on, okay, if I'm spending this much time and this much effort in my operations strategy, this refers to not just backup but also recovery and things like facilitating application and development environments with incremental copies that they can use for testing. There's an opportunity here to kind of look at how that happens today and how it might be tuned going forward so that we can get a little bit of savings out of the operations environment and apply it to working on some of the complexities that are involved with information management itself. We talked about the challenges in next generation data center designs. Going forward, there's certainly an ever-increasing amount of virtualization. It's going to lead to an ever-increasing amount of complexity in and of itself. If we choose to look at this as an opportunity, what we can do is, using some widely available management functions, we can get some handle on what's going on in our current environment. We can look at the new investments that we've made over the last year and a half, 2 years, wherever they were, and say, are these new assets underutilized? Because if they are, I need to figure out how to bring them into play and increase the return on investment. Since I know that return on investment and total cost of ownership are buzzwords that are used again and again, I think one of the things that IT management is more and more interested in is the ability to discover exactly what they have and discover exactly what's available for them to operate with going forward. In order to do that, whether you're using assessment techniques from Terakai or you have assessment techniques inside your own organization, you need to discover where you're at on a regular basis. Once you're doing that, what you tend to find is that you can work better in terms of procuring the next investment because you know what you're not going to run out of, so you know better how you can optimize the dollars that you have available for the next step. One area that brought that back to me early on this year was because it was so easy to create virtual machines out of virtual storage pools and virtualized physical servers, all of a sudden we were confronted with a situation where virtual machines were cropping up at a horrific rate. I mean, beyond what the IT centers expected. So when we'd go in and do an assessment on how many apps were operating in their environment, they'd find an incremental 25 to 30% of new applications, some of which weren't being backed up, some of which were drawing down on resources from the mission-critical stuff. And it's not that anybody did anything wrong. It's just that they didn't have or hadn't gotten to the point where they had I'm looking for a word here, a management console that they could go to and say, oh, look, that just showed up. So a lot of the, many of the vendors now are doing automated discovery products that are going to help you find things as they're deployed, whether they're done through a standard process or not. And I'm seeing more and more of that. You see it whenever people go to look at their DR, disaster recovery planning. We've done a lot of work over the last several months in the area of using integrated toolkits to provide disaster recovery. When we went through that, we do a discovery to say, oh, here's a second SharePoint deployment that was not listed on my list. Is that important for you? Is that important to you as a DR element? And they say, oh, absolutely, right? So you always get a chance to think about it when you're doing a DR design. The issue is that we don't do that all the time. So we need to kind of come to the point where we're thinking about it on a regular basis so that we make sure that the new virtual machines are protected from an operational point of view and that they're secured in accordance with your organization's governance and compliance concerns. So the goal that we might consider setting for ourselves is if we're spending 70% of our time keeping the lights turned on and 30% on innovation, if we could move that somehow to more like a 50-50 split, that would be a huge gain in terms of leveraging what I think is the most important resource available to any of us, and that's the knowledge of the people working inside the data center, right? They know everything there is to know about their information. They absolutely do. What we need to do is figure out a way to have them do more with what they know and less with the stuff they're working on. And when people are considering moves towards virtualization or increasing the amount of virtualization they're doing, one of the things we ask them to take a minute to do is, okay, what do you know already? And Terakai is really good at this. What do you know already about your information that would make a leap in terms of making that available to the business units for them to operate on in a different way? And it leads to some of the most interesting discussions because by pulling some of the pain and the day labor it takes to set up systems, by putting that into a virtualized world and being able to do some automated provisioning and automatically setting up management and operation functions, just doing those simple things allows the IT teams to have a much bigger impact on business than I think they've ever had a chance to do over the last, well, I'll pick right, since the internet boom in the latter part of the 1990s. I mean, I think it's an exciting time, and I think that lots of good things can happen. In order to support how to say this, in order to help end users and IT departments get used to thinking about what a virtualized world can do, what we did was we produced a set of templates that allows the IT organizations to think through, okay, here's an ideal picture of what we'd all like to see, right? I mean, we'd like to see neat little squares, and I have storage, and I have virtualization, and I'm doing virtual desktop, and I've got a recovery system, right? We'd like to see this. But what a picture like this helps people do is think, where in my world do I have a bottleneck that might prevent me from accomplishing this, right? So it's stylized, if you will, for discussions. But if you were to tick through some of the elements on this kind of a screen and say, gee, what do I know about this particular, what do I know about my memory utilization, right? Because now memory utilization is a huge thing in physical servers. It limits the number of virtual machines that I can deploy. We never worried, well, I didn't worry much, about the amount of physical memory I had on a physical server that was serving one application, right? I'd make sure that somebody went down there once a week and checked it and see that the lights were still turned on. I mean, not making light of it, but here we now need to manage a component of a component in order to make sure that we can extend our reach into better utilization and better use of the dollars that we're given to spend. So there's a couple things that can come from looking at a picture like this. And if you have interest, please contact Brett, and we can walk through this with you if you'd like. But what it helps you to do is get to the point where you're thinking more about how, if I have access to proven solutions that have reference architectures and build diagrams, and they present a pragmatic approach to dealing with complexity, how would I use that in my world? What does that mean to me? And you may find that some of these reference architectures are too devoted to a particular layer in the IT stack, or you may find that it doesn't provide enough information about, say, the scripts that would be used to start up an API in a virtualized environment. But we can help, and Terakai can facilitate this discussion because of its linkages with both your IT engineering teams and its engineering teams, and potentially vendor engineering teams, to figure out how to get you the right level of data and information that you need to operate on a reference architecture. But a lot of teams are putting a lot of effort and money into building these out for you so that you don't have to go there. And regardless of what your expertise is, you can probably find a reference architecture that speaks directly to how that expertise would fit into a bigger stack of the IT environment, and how that expertise could be extended either up the stack, down the stack, or sideways in the stack to provide more value to your organization. And that's been pretty exciting too. You don't have to necessarily go and take a week's worth of training in order to get access to this. You can help acquaint yourself better with kind of what the complexities are and what they mean from your perspective and your vantage point. And that's one of the things that we focus on when we talk to IT departments about what's available in the market today and what can you use to help you extend your skill set and your knowledge about how things are running in your space. What's to make us think that this time can be any better than the past? I won't go through a litany of everything we've been through, but if you, in brief, once upon a time there were mainframes and glass houses, and then there was client server, and then there was the advent of the personal computer as a business tool. Certainly the work that's been done around the area of compliance and securing data centers have come in waves over the last 6 or 7 years. What's to make us think that this time it can work any better than it did last time? There's a bunch of things that make me think that we have an opportunity to make a difference today that we haven't had in a while. One is you can use pre-validated architectures to address the total cost of ownership. That is, you can actually get piece parts in a documented form that says, if you were to do this, if you were to deploy this type of infrastructure, and whether it's a private cloud or in a public, or you're serving up a public cloud to your environment, we've seen both. Whatever you're delivering, you can actually get a template of it and get the nuts and bolts view of it rather than the marketing view of it. That's kind of been, that's the last 3.5 years or so, that's been made more and more available into the market. We're not keeping the covers over the boxes anymore and saying, oh, only a certified specialist can touch this box. So that as the operations of the systems are brought more and more to the surface, you have more and more capability to make them work the way you need them to work, as opposed to the way the vendor might have wanted it to work back in the day. By combining best-of-breed products and services with your business requirements, you can look at where your competencies, this is to the end users, right, and the IT people on the phone, where your competencies can be used to better expedite your business requirements. So you can mix and match with what partners can provide and what you can provide to bring better value to your end users. And this was not a hallmark of any period of IT before this. The vendors would keep everything very, very close to their vest. They wouldn't tell you how their product integrated with another company's product. You had to kind of, I had teams that were basically set up to learn how to do that in order to take advantage of the, the total cost of ownership benefits of integration. Well, now they're basically telling you how these things integrate, cross-platform and cross-vendor. Very, very helpful. And if you take, for instance, a particular competency, if you take a view of that competency from the point of view of a couple different vendors, you start to see how much you really know. And that was kind of an eye-opening experience for us when we did our own internal virtualization rollout. People started to say, yeah, I know how to do that, or yeah, I know that. I said, well, wait a minute. You told me 2 weeks ago you didn't know anything about how storage works. He goes, oh yeah, but I know how it works from the point of view of the server. Oh, okay, cool. So this gets us to the point where we can leverage these cross-stack relationships that already exist in the intelligence and background of the people working in IT. And I think that's what's going to make a difference this time. I think people learn rapidly if they're given the opportunity to see how things fit together. They can then translate that back to their own organizations and bring even greater value than we might have imagined, than I would have thought possible in another era. So here's some of the reasons why we think next generation data centers can provide value to the organizations they serve. We see situations where you can get 66% less deployment time using these reference architectures or things like them. You can get 50% smaller backups, which is good for everybody. And you can get a 90% reduction in disaster recovery design costs. So whatever you're spending in any of these areas, making systems available, we call maybe provisioning, what's your current service level for provisioning a server? What's your current service level for delivering and recovering from a backup environment? What's your current service level for disaster recovery? Everybody has targets and goals, and we know that we can meet those targets and goals. But right now, in these three areas, where are we spending money, where are we spending time, and could a different architecture help us recoup this type of value from that new set of tools and architectural design? And these are not just marketing numbers. These are numbers that actually came from a survey that was done of CIOs in the spring of this year. So it's a fairly dramatic change that we can bring, and I think by making changes in the way we do things today and kind of looking at how we might do them in a next generation data center built on both extending the knowledge of the people who are working in the data centers and using that knowledge to bring greater value to the end user by helping them get some of the stuff that's on their plate now out of the way, and so that they can get on with the things that they can really do well, which is help their own business units grow. To that end, I want to thank everybody on the phone for their patience and kindness, and I would take questions from the audience, and thank Terakai for the time.
Hey, Michael, thank you. Appreciate it. We did have some questions roll in, and a few of them had to do with the whole idea of getting started. How does my organization get started with an internal cloud?
That's a really, really good question. One of the things that we recommend is that you look at assessing your environments. We use a discover, design, deliver kind of model, where the discovery piece is about looking at the infrastructure and trying to find where there's excess capacity that could be used for a prototype of a cloud. And once we do that, you can also get a handle on what would be a good first candidate to start into that cloud. We would recommend moving forward with something like a shared service rather than a shared file system or a work group kind of application rather than moving forward with a tier 1 out of the gate, right? So we'd say assess kind of where you have capacity to build out a template or a pilot. Second thing would be look for applications that could be used and moved there as a learning exercise, not as a production exercise. And I think that would be the two things to think about out of the gate.
Okay. The next question is from Stacy, and she asks, are there particular products that you have to have in a data center to start building that internal cloud?
That's a really good question, and I thank Stacy for it. The answer to that question is you really don't. What you need is a commitment to look at how do we do things today, and if we want to move to a virtualized environment, how would we reuse what we have today to meet the service level agreements possible in a virtualized space that we don't necessarily have where there's one server, one piece of storage, and one internet connection. It's moving to a shared services model, whether it's at the network layer, the server layer, or the storage or operations layers. And as you take it on, we would almost always recommend that you use what you got first and do a pilot project to head that way and see how far your existing infrastructures will carry you to that space. There's really not a product requirement. It's a path requirement. You gotta, if you think about where you want to be, see how far you can get with what you already know. That would be a recommendation.
Great. We had another question. This one's from Dustin, and he asks, at what point does it make sense for a smaller company, say 100 computers, 5 servers, to roll out virtualized desktops or virtualized applications?
That's a really, really good question. The one thing you have to work off the quantifications, right? It's our experience that 100 users is right about the cut point in terms of doing a physical infrastructure that would support virtual desktops and then what you're going to do at the end point to support that. If it's 100 users that are doing a couple of applications, it makes applications, office applications is what I'm talking about here. If it's 100 users with a couple applications apiece, and may or may not be there may or may not be the total cost of ownership value in doing a virtual desktop environment, but if it's 100 users with office applications and access to mission-critical, whether they're databases, whether it's ERP, whether it's staff management, if there's an application or two in there, that tends to drive value in the VDI space from the consolidation of infrastructure. So was that clear enough to Dustin? I don't...
Michael, I think that's a good explanation.
Okay.
Yep, and Dustin says yes. Thank you.
Good question. Real good.
All right, well, we do have another question. This one's from Tom, along the same lines, but what would you say, roughly speaking, are adoption averages with respect to server virtualization and adoption of a cloud strategy?
Really good. If we go back to January 1st, 2009, it would have been about 20% of the world was virtualized, and CIOs were wondering what was in a cloud. January 2010, it's up to about 35% virtualization, including mission-critical apps at this point. People, a large portion of the market, probably over 30% of the market, is now saying, if I can't deploy it in a virtualized environment, you're going to have to justify to the CEO why you need your own server. That's about 30% of the market today. And I'd estimate, rough numbers, 40% of the existing servers are of the servers that existed physically 3 years ago are virtualized today. The projection is that by 2012, the chip makers, Intel, AMD, will ship more virtualized machines than exist today. So there's a big current here going forward that says being on the virtualized bus is a good way to start thinking about things.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, looks like that is all the questions that we've received.
Well,
so I do want to thank you for the time this afternoon and for supporting us.
I hope it was helpful, and thank you for your time and the chance to help.
Absolutely. And again, I would like to thank everyone that's participating in today's call, and certainly for those that gave us questions. And once again, thank you to everyone for participating today, and hope you have a tremendous afternoon.